What they burned down is exactly where I'll rebuild stronger.
The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor with a crystalline crack that somehow managed to cut through the pretentious chatter of New England's tech elite. I watched the golden liquid spread across the polished surface like spilled guilt, thinking how perfectly it represented my marriage. Expensive, wasteful, and making one spectacular mess. Mac, maybe Victor can give you a job parking cars when this hobby of yours finally tanks. Restrictions. My wife Lila's voice carried that particular brand of venom she'd perfected over our 12 years together. Sharp enough to slice through steel. Sweet enough to fool the idiots around us into thinking she was just being playfully sarcastic. But I knew better. I'd been on the receiving end of that tongue long enough to recognize the difference between playful banter and calculated humiliation. The biotech conference gala was in full swing at the Meridian Grand. All glass and chrome, and the kind of architectural arrogance that screamed, "We have more money than God." Lila stood beside me in her $1,000 black dress, every inch the successful corporate lawyer, her auburn hair pulled back in that severe bun that made her look like she could eviscerate opposing counsel with a glance. Which, to be fair, she probably could. Victor Harlan threw back his head and laughed, the sound echoing off the vaulted ceiling. At 52, he was everything I wasn't. Polished, connected, and completely convinced of his own brilliance. His silver hair was perfectly styled. His Italian suit probably cost more than most people's cars. And his smile had that practiced quality of someone who'd spent decades convincing investors to hand over their money. Now, Lila, Victor said, placing a proprietary hand on my wife's lower back that made my jaw clench. I'm sure Mac's little engineering projects serve their purpose. Not everyone can be a visionary. A crowd around of venture capitalists, biotech executives, and legal sharks tittered appreciatively. I recognized most of them. People who'd smiled to my face at dinner parties, who'd asked for my professional opinion on patent law, who'd suddenly developed selective amnesia about my 20 years in advanced engineering. Little projects. I kept my voice level, though my hands were itching to grab Victor by his perfectly knotted tie and introduce his face to the nearest wall. That's one way to put it. Sarah Chen, a patent attorney I'd known for years, stepped closer with that predatory gleam lawyers get when they smell weakness in the water. How is the workshop going, Mac? Still tinkering with those sensor prototypes? The way she said tinkering made it sound like I was building model airplanes in my garage, which, considering the appearances, wasn't entirely unfair. My workshop was a cluttered maze of circuit boards, half-assembled devices, and the accumulated chaos of 2 decades spent turning theoretical concepts into practical applications. It looked nothing like the sterile labs these people were used to. Business is steady, I said, taking a long sip of my bourbon. The Macallan 18 burned just right, reminding me that some things were worth the investment. Can't complain. Lila's laugh was like breaking glass. Steady? Mac, honey, you haven't landed a major contract in 3 years. Face reality. The circle of vultures pressed closer, sensing weakness. I could see it in their eyes. The same look predators get when they spot a limping deer. In their world, success was measured in quarterly reports and stock options. A guy working out of a converted barn, driving a 10-year-old pickup truck, and wearing a sport jacket that had seen better decades was clearly fair game. The market's been challenging, offered David Kim, a venture capitalist who'd turned me down for funding twice. His tone suggested he was being generous, even acknowledging my existence. The market's fine for people who understand it, Victor said, his arm now fully around Lila's waist. Innovation requires vision, not just technical competence. That's when I noticed the phone. Jennifer Walsh, a tech blogger whose articles could make or break companies, had her smartphone angled toward our little gathering. The red recording light was barely visible, but I'd spent enough time around surveillance equipment to spot it. She was live streaming this conversation to her 30,000 followers. Perfect. You're absolutely right, Victor, I said, raising my glass in a mock toast. Vision is everything. The ability to see beyond the immediate, to understand the long-term implications of your choices. Some people have it, some people don't. The subtext wasn't lost on anyone with half a brain. Victor's smile flickered for just a moment, but Lila jumped in before he could respond. "Mac's always been philosophical about failure," she said, her green eyes glittering with malice. "It's almost admirable, really, the way he can rationalize mediocrity into some kind of noble pursuit." They laughed again, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger. I'd moved past anger months ago when I'd first started suspecting what was happening between my wife and her boss. This was something else entirely, something calculating and patient and absolutely merciless. Mediocrity, I repeated, as if testing the word. "Interesting choice." "Oh, come on, Mac," said Robert Hayes, a former colleague who jumped ship to a bigger firm 5 years ago. "We're all friends here. Lila's just being honest. Sometimes honest feedback is exactly what we need to hear. Relinquish." Right. These people had been to my house, eaten my food, pretended to care about my opinions. Now they were circling like sharks, eager to watch Victor Harlan's golden boy routine while my marriage imploded in real time. "Honesty is definitely important," I agreed. "In fact, I've been thinking a lot about honesty lately, about the difference between what people say and what they actually do, about the gap between public personas and private behavior." Lila's fingers tightened around her wineglass, and Victor's smile became a little more forced. "Good. Let them wonder what I knew." "Speaking of behavior," Victor said, clearly trying to regain control of the conversation, "I should mention that Harlan Biotech is expanding our intellectual property division. We're always looking for experienced engineers who understand the commercial applications of their work." The implication was clear. I could come work for him, probably at half my current income, and be grateful for the opportunity. The crowd waited for my response, expecting gratitude or maybe desperate enthusiasm. Instead, I laughed. It wasn't a bitter laugh or a sarcastic one. It was the kind of deep, genuine amusement that comes from seeing a cosmic joke play out in real time. The sound cut through the ambient noise of the gala like a thunderclap, and conversations at nearby tables paused. "Something funny, Mac?" Victor asked, his voice carrying a warning edge. "Just thinking about timing," I said, finishing my bourbon. "How sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about these things." Beforehand, what I meant, Lila stepped forward and took Victor's arm. "We should probably mingle," she said. "I'm sure Mac has some networking to do." Theft was absolute. In front of 30,000 livestream viewers and half the tech industry's power players, my own wife had just told me to go find somewhere else to be. The circle of former friends and colleagues began to disperse, their entertainment value extracted from the evening's humiliation. "Enjoy the party," Victor said, his tone making it clear that my continued presence was an inconvenience. "And Mac, think about what I said. The offer stands. For now." They walked away together, Lila's hand resting possessively on Victor's chest as they approached a group of investors. I watched them go, noting how comfortable they looked together, how naturally Lila fit into Victor's world of corporate power and casual cruelty. Jennifer Walsh approached, her phone still recording. "Any comment on tonight's conversation, Mac?" I looked directly into her camera, knowing that whatever I said would be dissected and analyzed by thousands of people within the hour. The smart play was to deflect, to make some gracious comment about friendly competition and professional challenges. Instead, I smiled. "Just this," I said. "In my experience, the people who talk the loudest about vision and innovation are usually the ones who understand it the least. Real innovation happens quietly, in places where nobody's paying attention. And sometimes, the biggest discoveries come from people everyone's written off as failures." Himself, I handed my empty glass to a passing waiter and headed for the exit, leaving behind the glittering world of corporate ambition and casual betrayal. Behind me, I could hear the conversation resuming, probably dissecting my parting words and speculating about my mental state. Let them talk. They had no idea what was coming. The valet brought my battered pickup truck around, and I tipped him $20 just to watch his expression change from condescending pity to confused gratitude. As I drove through the New England night toward my workshop, I thought about timing and irony, and the beautiful, terrible symmetry of revenge. Tomorrow, I had a meeting with my patent attorney. Not the kind of meeting Lila knew about. She'd stopped paying attention to my business affairs months ago, too busy with her own career advancement and whatever she was doing with Victor after hours. The patent application I'd filed 18 months ago had finally been approved. Not just any patent, a revolutionary sensor technology that would fundamentally change how biotech companies monitored cellular processes. The kind of innovation that turned small engineering firms into acquisition targets and modest inventors into very wealthy men. The purchase offer had come through 3 days ago. $173 million, with a signing bonus that would clear escrow within the week. But Victor and Lila didn't know that yet. They thought they were watching a failure, a has-been engineer whose best days were behind him. They had no idea they were actually witnessing the calm before a very expensive storm. I pulled into my workshop parking lot and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the converted barn that had housed my life's work for the past decade. Tomorrow, everything would change. By the end of the week, I'd be richer than Victor Harlan could imagine. And then the real fun would begin. The workshop smelled like coffee, solder, and the particular brand of organized chaos that comes from 20 years of turning theoretical concepts into practical applications. I'd been here since 5 a.m., unable to sleep after the previous night's humiliation, working on a prototype that no longer mattered, but gave my hands something to do while my mind processed what came next. My phone buzzed with notifications every few minutes. Jennifer Walsh's livestream had gone viral overnight, with #ParkingCarsMac trending on social media. The comments ranged from sympathetic to savage, but most people seemed to agree that watching a man get publicly eviscerated by his own wife was quality entertainment. The workshop door chimed as Tommy Brennan pushed through, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the road. At 35, Tommy was the best electronics technician I'd ever worked with, and one of the few people who'd stuck with me through the lean years when contracts were scarce and paychecks were inconsistent. "Rough night?" he asked, handing me the coffee. Tommy had a gift for understatement that bordered on the supernatural. "Could have been worse," I said, taking a grateful sip. "Could have been sober," Tommy snorted. "Saw the video. Your wife's got a real talent for the jugular." Lila's always been direct. I pulled up the patent documentation on my computer. The legal language that represented 2 decades of work finally crystallized into intellectual property. How'd the final testing go on the sensor array? Every parameter within specification. Tommy settled into his usual chair, a battered office recliner that had seen better decades. "Mac, can I ask you something?" "Shoot. Why haven't you told anyone about the patent sale? I mean, after last night." I leaned back in my chair, considering how much to reveal. Tommy had been loyal through everything, but what I was planning went beyond business decisions into territory that could get complicated fast. "Because timing matters," I said finally, "and because some revelations are more effective when they come as a complete surprise." Before Tommy could ask follow-up questions, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Paul Rossi, my attorney, and one of the few people who knew the complete scope of what was about to happen. "Paulie," I answered, "please tell me you have good news." "Better than good. The escrow cleared this morning. $173 million, minus my fee and taxes. You're officially rich, you magnificent bastard." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 2 decades lift off my shoulders. The sensor technology had been my white whale, the project that had consumed nights and weekends and nearly destroyed my marriage long before Victor Harlan entered the picture. "Any word from Lila's lawyers?" I asked. "Radio silence. They're probably still trying to figure out if you actually have any assets worth pursuing." Paulie's laugh was like sandpaper. "Wait until they find out about the patent. Speaking of which, when do you want to make this public?" Expelled. "Not yet. I need to gather some more evidence first." "Evidence of what?" Relinquid. I looked at Tommy, who was pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. Evidence that my wife and her boss have been planning to destroy my business and steal my intellectual property. Evidence that they've been having an affair for at least 6 months. Evidence that Victor Harlan has been systematically undermining my professional reputation to eliminate me as a potential competitor. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Mac," Polly said finally, "please tell me you're not planning anything stupid." Define stupid. Anything that ends with you in jail or them in the hospital. I laughed. Nothing illegal, nothing violent. Just good old-fashioned consequences for bad decisions. That's what worries me. Your idea of consequences tends to be creative. As I hung up, Tommy was staring at me with the expression of someone who just realized he was sitting next to a live grenade. "An affair?" he asked. 6 months, minimum, probably longer. I pulled up a folder on my computer labeled Personal Files and opened a subfolder that contained screenshots, email forwards, and phone records that painted a very clear picture of my wife's extracurricular activities. The evidence had started accumulating by accident. Lila had always been careless with technology, leaving her laptop open and her phone unlocked around the house. At first, I'd noticed small things: late-night texts, mysterious dinner meetings, sudden changes in her schedule that didn't quite add up. Then I'd started paying attention. "Jesus," Tommy breathed, looking at a forwarded email chain between Lila and Victor, discussing their strategy for handling the Mac situation. The messages were clinical in their cruelty, treating my professional destruction like a business problem to be solved. "This one's my favorite," I said, clicking on a voice message Lila had left on Victor's phone 3 weeks ago. Her voice filled the workshop, slightly slurred from wine and completely unguarded. "I can't wait until this is over," she said. "Mac's so pathetic lately, moping around that workshop like some kind of tragic inventor. Once we prove he stole your sensor designs, we can finally be together without all this sneaking around. God, I can't believe I wasted 12 years on him." Ramesing Kua hit the workbench with a sharp crack. "She thinks you stole Victor's designs?" "Victor's been telling people that my sensor technology is based on proprietary research from Harlan Biotech. Complete BS, obviously. I filed the provisional patent 2 years before he even knew what I was working on. But it's a clever strategy. Destroy my credibility, steal my work, and get rid of an inconvenient husband all at once." Chimed again, and Maria Santos entered with her usual energy. Maria was our materials engineer, a brilliant woman in her early 40s who'd left a lucrative position at MIT to work with our small team. She took one look at our expressions and stopped short. "Did someone die?" she asked. "Just Mac's marriage," Tommy said. Maria poured herself coffee from the pot we kept running constantly and settled into her chair. "Finally figured out about Lila and the golden boy?" Meng Guidesai stared at her. "You knew?" "Mac, honey, everyone knew. Lila's not exactly subtle when she's trying to impress someone. The way she talked about Victor at the Christmas party, how she suddenly started working late every night he was in town, the fact that she stopped wearing her wedding ring 3 months ago." I looked down at my own left hand, where my wedding ring had sat for 12 years. "She stopped wearing her ring? You didn't notice?" Maria's voice was gentle. "Mac, when's the last time you and Lila had a real conversation? One that wasn't about schedules or bills or her complaining about your business?" I tried to remember and came up empty. Somewhere along the line, my wife had become a stranger who shared my address and criticized my life choices. The realization should have hurt more than it did. "So what's the plan?" Tommy asked. "You can't just let them get away with this." I rested another folder on my computer, this one labeled Harlan Biotech Research. It contained 6 months of careful investigation into Victor's company, his business practices, and his personal history. What I'd found was illuminating. "Victor Harlan is a fraud," I said simply. "His PhD is from a diploma mill. His early research papers are plagiarized, and Harlan Biotech is hemorrhaging money despite their public success. They're about 18 months away from bankruptcy, unless they can acquire some revolutionary technology to attract new investors." "Like your sensor patents," Maria said, understanding immediately. "Exactly. Victor needs my technology to save his company, but he can't afford to buy it legitimately. So he's trying to steal it by claiming I stole it from him first. Destroy my credibility, tie up the patents in litigation, and eventually acquire them for pennies on the dollar when I'm forced to settle. Tommy was scrolling through the financial documents I'd compiled. How did you get all this information? Public records, mostly. SEC filings, patent databases, academic journals. Plus some help from a private investigator who specializes in corporate fraud. I didn't mention that the private investigator was actually Maria's ex-husband, a detail that might complicate things later. My phone buzzed with a text message from Lila. Working late again tonight. Don't wait up. I showed the message to Tommy and Maria. She's not even trying to be convincing anymore. What do you want to do about it? Maria asked. I closed the laptop and looked at my two most loyal employees. People who'd stuck with me through years of uncertainty and modest paychecks. They deserved to know what was coming. I want to destroy them, I said quietly. Not physically, not illegally, but completely and publicly. I want Victor Harlan exposed as the fraud he is, his company bankrupted, and his reputation in ruins. I want Lila to lose everything she values, her career, her social status, her financial security. I want them both to understand exactly what it feels like to be humiliated and dismissed and treated like failures. The workshop was silent, except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. That's, Tommy started, then stopped. Terrifying, I suggested. I was going to say, about time, Maria said. Those people have been treating you like garbage for months. If you have the means to fight back, why wouldn't you? My phone rang again. This time, it was Jennifer Walsh, the tech blogger who'd live-streamed my humiliation the night before. Miss Walsh, I answered, what can I do for you? I wanted to follow up on last night's conversation, she said. Your comments about real innovation happening quietly, there seemed to be more to that story. There always is. Would you be interested in giving me an exclusive interview? My audience is very interested in your perspective on the current state of biotech innovation. JFK, I looked at Tommy and Maria, both of whom were nodding encouragingly. I might be, I said, but I'd want to wait until I have something more substantial to discuss. Say, next week? Jamal for me. And Mac? For what it's worth, I thought you handled yourself with remarkable grace last night. A lot of people would have lost their temper. Right, I hung up, Maria was smiling. You're going to use her platform to expose Victor, among other things. But first, I need to set the stage properly. Make sure all the pieces are in place before I start revealing what I know. I'm looking at the financial documents. Mac, if this patent sale is real, if you're actually worth this much money now, why go through with the revenge? Why not just take Lila for half in the divorce and move on with your life? It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since the patent sale went through. The simple answer was that I could afford to disappear, start over somewhere else, and never think about Victor Harlan or my faithless wife again. But that wasn't the complete answer. Because they're not going to stop, I said. Victor needs my technology to save his company, and Lila won't be satisfied until she's completely destroyed my reputation. Even if I disappeared tomorrow, they'd keep spreading lies about me. Keep claiming I stole Victor's work, keep trying to invalidate my patents through litigation. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the New England countryside that had been my home for 2 decades. Besides, I added, some people need to learn that actions have consequences. Victor and Lila have spent months treating me like I'm nobody, like I'm some pathetic failure who doesn't deserve basic respect. They've made their choice about what kind of people they want to be. And now you're going to show them what kind of person you are, Maria said. Exactly. The workshop phone rang, and I trust to a Linst in the New England. The workshop phone she better there states that she wanted me. Exactly. The workshop phone rang, and Tommy answered it with our standard greeting. McCarthy Engineering, this is Tommy. His expression changed as he listened to the caller. Hold on, let me check. He covered the receiver and looked at me. It's Victor Harlan. He wants to schedule a meeting to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Zem smiled. Tell him I'm available tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock, here at the workshop. Meltz. Isley's. You sure about that? Tommy asked. Absolutely. It's time Mr. Harlan and I had a proper conversation about innovation, intellectual property, and the importance of doing your homework before you try to destroy someone's life. As Tommy scheduled the meeting, I started planning exactly what Victor Harlan was going to learn about the difference between appearing successful and actually being dangerous. The game was about to begin. Victor Harlan arrived at my workshop in a silver Maserati that probably cost more than most people's houses. I watched from the window as he climbed out, straightening his Italian suit and looking around my converted barn with the expression of someone who'd accidentally stepped in something unpleasant. He wasn't alone. Lila emerged from the passenger side, her auburn hair perfect despite the October wind, wearing a charcoal business suit that screamed expensive legal representation. She'd brought her briefcase, which meant this wasn't a social call. Tommy and Maria had made themselves scarce, though I knew they were watching from the office upstairs. We'd spent the morning preparing for this conversation, setting up recording equipment, and making sure every relevant document was within easy reach. The door chimed as they entered, and I looked up from my workbench where I'd been assembling a prototype sensor array. The irony wasn't lost on me. Victor was here to steal technology he thought belonged to him, while I worked on the very innovation that had just made me richer than his entire company. Mac, Victor said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth that successful sociopaths perfect over time. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. Victor, Lila. I set down my soldering iron and turned to face them, noting how they stood together, close enough to present a united front, but not so close as to make their relationship obvious. What can I do for you? Medela opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We wanted to discuss some concerns that have come to our attention regarding your recent work. Concerns? Victor stepped forward, his smile never wavering. Mac, I'll be direct. We have reason to believe that your sensor technology incorporates proprietary research developed by Harlan Biotech. Research that you may have had access to through Lila's work with our legal department. The accusation in the air like smoke. I let the silence stretch, watching their faces, noting the slight tension around Victor's eyes, and the way Lila's fingers tightened on her briefcase handle. That's interesting, I said finally. Can you be more specific about which aspects of my work you think belong to you? Lila pulled out a stack of technical documents and spread them across my workbench. These are preliminary research notes from Harlan Biotech's sensor development program, dating back 3 years. The similarities to your current prototypes are significant. I picked up the first document and skimmed it, recognizing immediately that it was a crude attempt to reverse engineer my own published papers. The technical specifications were close enough to suggest familiarity with my work, but different enough to provide plausible deniability. Impressive, I said. Someone put a lot of effort into creating these. Victor's smile flickered. Creating them? Well, they're obviously fabricated. The timestamps are wrong, the technical specifications contain errors that weren't corrected in the literature until 18 months ago, and the formatting doesn't match any of Harlan Biotech's actual internal documents. I walked to my filing cabinet and pulled out my own folder, thick with patent applications, research notes, and correspondence dating back 5 years. Here's my provisional patent application, filed 28 months ago, I said, handing Victor the document. Here are my initial research notes, dating back 4 years. And here's the correspondence with my material supplier, showing that I've been ordering specific components for this project since before your company even entered the sensor market. Professional composure cracked slightly. Those documents could have been backdated. Could have been, I agreed, but they weren't. Would you like me to call my patent attorney? Or maybe we could contact the USPTO directly and verify the filing dates. Ragas set down the patent application, his golden boy charm replaced by something colder and more calculating. Mac, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not here to accuse anyone of anything. We're here to discuss collaboration, unresolved. Collaboration? Harlan Biotech is always interested in working with talented independent researchers. Your sensor technology, combined with our resources and market connections, could be incredibly valuable. I almost laughed. Victor was trying to pivot from attempted theft to acquisition, probably hoping I was desperate enough to accept whatever lowball offer he had prepared. "What kind of collaboration did you have in mind?" I asked. "A licensing agreement, initially. Harlan Biotech would handle manufacturing, marketing, and distribution, while you'd receive royalties on all sales. Very generous royalties. Say, 3% of net revenue. 3% for technology that I'd just sold for $173 million. That's an interesting offer," I said. "But I'm afraid there's a problem." "What kind of problem?" Lila asked. I walked to my computer and pulled up the patent database, entering my name and project details. The screen filled with official documentation, patents granted, patents pending, and a comprehensive record of my intellectual property portfolio. "The technology isn't available for licensing," I said. "I sold it last week." Springfield. The silence that followed was profound. Victor stared at the computer screen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and dawning horror. Lila had gone completely still, her legal mind obviously working through the implications. "Sold it?" Victor's voice was barely above a whisper. "Complete acquisition. Patents, prototypes, research data, everything. The buyer wanted exclusive rights." "How much?" Lila asked. I turned to look at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, noting the way her green eyes had gone sharp and predatory. She was already calculating divorce settlements and asset division, trying to figure out how much of my windfall she could claim. "Enough," I said simply. Victor had found his voice again. "Who was the buyer? Which company?" "I'm not at closure agreement." That was technically true, though the NDA was more about protecting the buyer's acquisition strategy than concealing their identity. BioNova Industries was a major player in the sensor market, and they'd paid top dollar to keep their competitors from knowing what they'd acquired until their next product launch. "Mac," Lila said, her lawyer voice emerging, "we need to discuss this privately. As your wife, I have certain legal rights regarding marital assets and business decisions." "Actually," I said, pulling out another folder, "we need to discuss this." I handed her a document that Paul Rossi had prepared the day before. "Divorce papers. I'm filing on grounds of adultery and abandonment." Lila's face went white. "You can't prove adultery." "Can't I?" I walked to my computer and opened the folder containing 6 months of evidence. Voice messages, email chains, credit card records showing hotel visits, photographs from your private investigator friend who's been documenting your relationship with Victor for the past 4 months. Jaume stepped forward, his composure completely shattered. "You had us investigated?" "I had you researched," I corrected. "There's a difference. I wanted to understand who I was dealing with before I made any important decisions." I clicked through a series of financial documents, SEC filings, and business records that painted a very clear picture of Harlan Biotech's actual financial situation. "Interesting company you're running, Victor. 17 million in debt, 3 failed product launches, and about 18 months of operating capital left. No wonder you needed my sensor technology so badly." Victor's golden boy facade had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate expression of a man watching his carefully constructed world collapse in real time. "You don't understand," he said. "Harlan Biotech employs over 200 people. We have contracts, obligations, investors who are counting on us. You should have thought about that before you decided to steal my work and destroy my marriage." Lila finally found her voice. "Mac, we can work this out. Whatever you think you know about Victor and me, we can discuss it like adults. There's no need for lawyers or investigators or public accusations." "Public accusations?" I smiled. "Lila, I haven't made any public accusations. Yet." Temptation. The threat hung in the air like a sword. Both of them understood that I was holding enough evidence to destroy their reputations, their careers, and their futures. The question was what I planned to do with that power. "What do you want?" Victor asked. "I want you to leave my workshop," I said. "I want you to stop spreading lies about my work and my character. And I want you both to understand that actions have consequences, mutually. And if we don't?" Lila's voice had gone cold and professional. Then you'll discover exactly how much damage a motivated engineer with unlimited resources can do to people who've made the mistake of underestimating him. Roofing. Victor and Lila exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Victor straightened his tie and attempted to reassemble his professional dignity. "This isn't over, Mac." "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's about to get much more interesting." Rhea left without another word, Victor's Maserati spitting gravel as they accelerated out of my parking lot. I watched them go, then walked upstairs to where Tommy and Maria had been monitoring the conversation through our security system. "Holy crap," Tommy said. "You actually did it. You sold the patents." "For how much?" Maria asked. $173 million. Maria sat down hard in her chair. "Jesus Christ, Mac. You're rich." "We're rich," I corrected. "You two have been with me through everything. You're getting bonuses that will set you up for life." "What about Lila?" Tommy asked. "Do I get Lila?" Tommy asked. "How much can she claim in the divorce?" "Nothing," I said. "The patents were filed before we were married, developed with my own resources, and sold to a company that has no connection to any marital assets. Paul Rossi made sure the sale was structured to protect it from any community property claims." Illinois. Pulled out my phone and called Jennifer Walsh, the tech blogger who'd been waiting for an exclusive interview. "Jennifer, it's Mac McCarthy. Are you still interested in that story we discussed? Because I think it's time to have that conversation about real innovation and the people who try to steal it." As I scheduled the interview that would expose Victor Harlan's fraud and Lila's betrayal to the world, I thought about timing and consequences, and the beautiful symmetry of watching predators become prey. The game was just getting started. The interview with Jennifer Walsh went live at exactly 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, time to coincide with the opening of the stock market and the beginning of Harlan Biotech's quarterly board meeting. I'd spent 3 hours the night before walking Jennifer through the evidence, providing documentation for every claim, and making sure she understood the full scope of what she was about to publish. The headline read, "The Golden Boys Fall: How Victor Harlan Built a Biotech Empire on Lies and Stolen Research." By 10 a.m., Harlan Biotech's stock had dropped 30%. By noon, the SEC had announced an investigation into the company's research claims and financial reporting. By evening, Victor Harlan had been placed on administrative leave by his own board of directors. I was in my workshop, pretending to focus on a prototype design while monitoring the fallout across multiple screens. Tommy and Maria had given up any pretense of working, instead refreshing news sites and social media feeds to track the spreading chaos. "Jesus," Tommy said, reading from his laptop. "Listen to this. Sources close to Harlan Biotech confirm that CEO Victor Harlan's PhD credentials are under investigation following revelations that his doctorate was obtained from an unaccredited institution. The company's stock has been suspended from trading, pending a full audit of their intellectual property claims." Muttered had been ringing constantly since the story broke. Reporters, former colleagues, business contacts, and complete strangers all wanted to know more about the mild-mannered engineer who just destroyed one of New England's most prominent biotech executives. I'd ignored most of the calls, but when Paul Rossi's name appeared on my screen, I answered immediately. "Paulie, please tell me you have good news." "Better than good. Lila's lawyer called an hour ago. They want to discuss settlement terms for the divorce." "Settlement terms?" "Yesterday she was demanding half of everything I owned." That was before she realized you're worth more than Victor's entire company. Her legal team has apparently advised her that fighting you in court would be expensive, public, and ultimately futile. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the irony. Lila had spent months treating me like a failure, only to discover that her despised husband was now wealthy enough to hire every lawyer in New England if necessary. What are they offering? Complete capitulation. She'll accept a minimal settlement in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce. No community property claims, no spousal support, no public statements about your business or personal affairs. And in return, you release the evidence of her affair or her involvement in Victor's scheme to steal your patents. I considered the offer while watching Maria scroll through the social media reactions to Jennifer Walsh's article. The consensus seemed to be that Victor Harlan was a fraud who'd finally been exposed. while I was either a brilliant strategist or a vengeful sociopath, depending on who was commenting. Counteroffer, I said. She gets nothing except what she brought into the marriage. No settlement, no support, no consideration for her feelings. In exchange, I won't press charges for conspiracy to commit intellectual property theft. That might be pushing it. Her lawyer can argue whatever he wants. I have recordings of Lila and Victor planning to destroy my business and steal my patents. That's conspiracy, and it's a felony. She should be grateful I'm willing to settle for a clean divorce. Paul was quiet for a long moment. You know, when I first met you 20 years ago, you were this idealistic kid who wanted to change the world through engineering. I never thought you had this in you. Neither did I admitted, but people change when they're pushed far enough. After I hung up, Maria approached my workbench with a serious expression. Mac, can I ask you something? Sure. Are you okay? I mean, really okay? Because watching you destroy these people, it's impressive, but it's also kind of terrifying. I set down my tools and looked at her. Maria had been with my company for 8 years, through good times and bad, and she'd never been afraid to speak her mind. You think I've gone too far? I think you've done exactly what they deserved, she said. But I'm worried about what happens to you after this is over. Revenge is satisfying, but it's not the same thing as happiness. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at Murphy's Bar, 8 p.m. Come alone. V. I showed the message to Tommy and Maria. Victor wants a face-to-face meeting. That's probably not a good idea, Tommy said. Guy's desperate. His life is falling apart. No telling what he might do. Which is exactly why I need to go, I said. Victor Harlan has spent months underestimating me. It's time he understood exactly who he's been dealing with. Mutual's Bar was the kind of place where New England's working class went to drink away their troubles. Dim lighting, cheap beer, and a clientele that minded their own business. I arrived early and claimed a corner booth where I could watch the entrance, ordering a bourbon and settling in to wait. Victor arrived at exactly 8 p.m., looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in the past 12 hours. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his golden boy confidence had been replaced by the hollow expression of someone watching his world collapse in real time. He slid into the booth across from me, waving off the bartender's approach. Mac. Victor. Rough day at the office? You destroyed me. 20 years of building my company, my reputation, my life, and you destroyed it all in a single morning. I didn't destroy anything, I said calmly. I just revealed what was already there. The lies, the fraud, the stolen research. That was all you. The research wasn't stolen. I genuinely believed your technology was based on our preliminary work. Bees, you knew exactly what you were doing. You needed my patents to save your failing company, so you decided to steal them by claiming I'd stolen them from you first. It was actually a pretty clever plan. Victor stared at his hands, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. What do you want? He asked. Money? Public vindication? My complete humiliation? I want you to understand something, I said. For months, you and Lila treated me like I was nobody. A failure, a has-been. Someone whose opinions didn't matter and whose feelings didn't count. You made jokes about my business, mocked my work, and planned to destroy my life like it was some kind of game. I finished my bourbon and signaled for another. But here's the thing about underestimating people, Victor. Sometimes the quiet guy in the corner turns out to be the most dangerous person in the room. So what happens now? You've exposed me, destroyed my company, and ruined my reputation. Isn't that enough? That depends, I said. Are you planning to fight the divorce? Try to drag Lila through a public trial? Make any more claims about my intellectual property? No, he said quietly. I'm done. My lawyers are advising me to declare bankruptcy and disappear for a while. Maybe move to Europe. Start over somewhere else. Michelle. Good choice. Metric stood to leave, then paused. Can I ask you something? The patent sale. How long have you been planning this? Planetary what? Building revolutionary technology and selling it for fair market value? That's not a plan, Victor. That's just good business. You know what I mean. The timing, the investigation, the evidence you gathered. This wasn't random. You orchestrated all of this. I smiled. Victor, 6 months ago, I was a small-town engineer with a failing marriage and a workshop full of prototypes nobody cared about. You and Lila decided to destroy me because you thought I was weak and desperate. You were wrong about the weak part. He left without another word, walking out into the October night like a man heading toward his own execution. I finished my second bourbon and drove home, thinking about consequences and justice and the strange satisfaction of watching bullies get exactly what they deserved. My house felt different when I walked through the door. Emptier, but also cleaner somehow. Lila had moved out that afternoon while I was at the workshop, taking only her personal belongings and leaving behind 12 years of shared history. There was a note on the kitchen counter, written in her precise handwriting. Mac, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry. You deserved better. L. N. MMC. I read the note twice, then threw it away. Apologies were easy when your world was collapsing, and you needed someone to blame besides yourself. If Lila was truly sorry, she'd had plenty of opportunities to make different choices over the past 6 months. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer Walsh. Follow-up story publishing tomorrow. The Quiet Genius. How Mac McCarthy turned the tables on corporate fraud. Thought you should know. Jectile. I poured myself a glass of the good scotch, the bottle Lila had always said was too expensive for casual drinking, and sat in my living room, looking out at the New England countryside that had been my home for 2 decades. Tomorrow, the follow-up story would cement my transformation from victim to victor. Victor Harlan would be remembered as a fraud who'd been exposed by the man he'd tried to destroy. Lila would be known as the wife who'd betrayed her husband for a golden boy who turned out to be made of fool's gold. And I would be the quiet engineer who'd proven that sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply revealing the truth at exactly the right moment. The game was over, and I'd won more completely than I'd ever imagined possible. But Maria had been right about one thing. Revenge was satisfying, but it wasn't the same as happiness. That would have to come later, after I figured out what to do with the rest of my life, now that I'd destroyed everyone who'd tried to destroy me. For tonight, though, the satisfaction was enough. 3 weeks after Victor Harlan's public destruction, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. The New England Biotech Association's annual gala, the same event where Lila had humiliated me just a month earlier, wanted to honor me as their Innovator of the Year. The irony was perfect. A month ago, I'd been the pathetic failure everyone pitied. Now, I was the genius everyone wanted to celebrate. Same people, same event, completely different narrative. I decided to accept the award. The Meridian Grand looked exactly the same, all glass and chrome and architectural arrogance. But the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of dismissive glances and condescending smiles, I was greeted with enthusiastic handshakes and requests for photographs. Everyone wanted to be associated with the quiet engineer who'd outsmarted the golden boy. Jennifer Walsh approached as I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. Mac, congratulations on the award. How does it feel to be back here? Educational, I said, watching the crowd of people who'd ignored me just weeks ago now hanging on my every word. It's amazing how quickly people's memories can change. Any regrets about how things played out with Victor and Lila? I considered the question while scanning the crowd. Most of the same faces were here. The venture capitalists, biotech executives, and legal sharks who'd enjoyed my public humiliation. Now, they were all eager to claim they'd always believed in my potential. No regrets, I said finally. Sometimes people need to learn that actions have consequences. The presentation ceremony began at 8 p.m., with the association president delivering a speech about innovation, perseverance, and the importance of supporting independent researchers. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. This was the same organization that had ignored my work for years until it became impossible to dismiss. Ladies and gentlemen, the president announced, This year's Innovator of the Year award goes to Mac McCarthy, whose revolutionary sensor technology represents the kind of breakthrough thinking that drives our industry forward. Unwilling, the applause was enthusiastic, though I noticed several people in the crowd who looked uncomfortable. They remembered the last time I'd stood on this stage, remembered laughing at my wife's cruel jokes and Victor's dismissive comments. I approached the podium, looking out at an audience that had transformed from predators to supplicants in the span of a month. The acceptance speech I'd prepared was gracious and professional, full of the kind of humble gratitude that award ceremonies demanded. Instead, I decided to tell the truth. "Thank you for this honor," I began. "It's particularly meaningful to receive it here, in this room, surrounded by so many people who've been part of my journey." My gaze swept across the audience, noting the nervous expressions on several familiar faces. A month ago, I stood in this same room and listened to people mock my work, dismiss my achievements, and treat me like a failure whose opinions didn't matter. Some of you laughed when my own wife suggested I should get a job parking cars. Others nodded approvingly when a prominent CEO claimed my life's work was nothing more than a hobby. Had gone completely silent. This wasn't the gracious acceptance speech they'd expected. Tonight, that CEO's company is bankrupt. His reputation is destroyed, and he's facing federal charges for securities fraud. My wife has discovered that betraying someone for a golden boy who turns out to be made of fool's gold can be an expensive mistake. And I'm standing here, holding an award from people who spent years ignoring my work until it became impossible to dismiss. I held up the crystal trophy, letting the light catch its faceted surface. This award isn't really about innovation or perseverance or breakthrough thinking. It's about power, and how quickly people's attitudes change when the balance of power shifts. A month ago, you saw me as someone you could safely ignore or mock. Tonight, you see me as someone you need to impress. The audience was shifting uncomfortably, unsure whether to applaud or head for the exits. I could see Jennifer Walsh in the front row, her phone recording every word. "So let me leave you with this thought," I continued. "The next time you're tempted to dismiss someone as a failure, to mock their work or treat them like they don't matter, remember this moment. Remember that the quiet person you're underestimating might be the most dangerous person in the room." I set the trophy on the podium and walked away, leaving behind a room full of people who'd just received a masterclass in the difference between respect and fear. Outside the hotel, the October air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of winter and new beginnings. I loosened my tie and breathed deeply, feeling lighter than I had in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Saw the live stream. Holy crap, Mac. You actually did it." Transmissions from Maria. "Remind me never to get on your bad side. That was terrifying and amazing." And finally, one from Paul Rossi. "Divorce papers signed, sealed, and delivered. You're officially a free man. Also, that speech is going to be legendary." I drove through the New England night toward my workshop, past the converted barn that had housed my dreams and ambitions for 2 decades. Tomorrow, I'd start the next phase of my life. Maybe expand the business, maybe travel, maybe just enjoy being wealthy enough to do whatever I wanted. But tonight, I was content to savor the perfect symmetry of my revenge. Victor Harlan had learned that stealing from people has consequences. Lila had discovered that betraying someone for personal gain can backfire spectacularly. And an entire industry had been reminded that underestimating the quiet guy in the corner can be a fatal mistake. I pulled into my workshop parking lot and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the building where I'd spent countless hours turning theoretical concepts into practical applications. The work that had seemed so futile, so ignored, so dismissed by people who thought they were smarter and more important than a small-town engineer. The same work that had just made me richer than all of them combined. My phone rang one final time. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. "Mac, it's Victor." I almost hung up, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want, Victor?" "I wanted to say goodbye. I'm leaving for London tomorrow, starting over. And I wanted to tell you, what you did to me, What you did to all of us. It was brilliant. Ruthless, but brilliant. Thanks for the professional assessment. I mean it. I spent months thinking you were weak, thinking you were someone I could push around and manipulate. I never realized I was dealing with someone who could destroy me so completely. There was a long pause, and when Victor spoke again, his voice was quiet and defeated. You won, Mac. You won everything. I hope it was worth it. Went dead. I sat in my truck, thinking about victory and consequences, and the strange emptiness that sometimes follows the completion of a long-sought goal. Victor was right. I had won everything. My enemies were destroyed, my reputation was restored, and my bank account was large enough to buy and sell people like the ones who'd mocked me. But Maria had been right too. Revenge was satisfying, but it wasn't the same as happiness. That would have to come next. I climbed out of the truck and walked toward my workshop, toward the place where I'd built the technology that had changed everything. Tomorrow, I'd start building something new. Not just inventions or businesses, but a life that was about more than proving other people wrong. Tonight, though, I was content to be the quiet engineer who'd reminded an entire industry that underestimating people can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. The workshop door closed behind me with a soft click, and I began planning what to build next.